Okay, welcome everybody. My name is Sue Bertram. I am the Associate Dean of Science for Recruitment, Retention, and Student Success. About 12 years ago, as a fairly new professor, I was working with the Dean of Science, and we decided that we should start a Science Student Success Center. And so at that time, I started working with several different people, including Lily Villanueva, who many of you know very well, to try and build a center where students could feel like they could walk in at any time and just get a real sense of community, that they could get help if they weren't doing so well, they could help others. We ended up doing a bunch of different research and deciding that probably the best way forward would be to work with a bunch of volunteer mentors. We decided that the more and more we talked to students, we heard that they not only wanted help with how they're doing in their classes, but they also wanted to really build a community amongst each other and get a feel for the kinds of jobs and things that were out there. So about 10 years ago, we started this networking forum. So now this is our 10th anniversary in running a science networking forum. And I want to thank everybody who's joined us tonight, as well as in the past. We couldn't do this without all of our volunteers from industries and government and things surrounding the Ottawa area. So thank you. Thank you also for all the returning students and those of you who are new to us tonight. We have a different format than we have done in the past, but of course, everyone's probably getting quite used to that because everything's different than it has been in the past. Before I do another further introduction about what's going to happen, I just wanted to say that I've put into the chat now my name and contact information. If you're a student and you're struggling at all in any different way and you just want to feel like you've been heard, and that you have some concerns or that you have ideas for future, by all means, reach out to me. I'm always happy to have a Zoom chat with people or talk about on email about the kinds of things that are going on. So I'm there for you. So welcome to the Science Networking Forum. I know I've already thanked everybody, but we really couldn't do this with the professionals that are here today. So we really wanted to thank you for taking the time to attend our event. We are just thrilled to have had so much great support from so many different industries surrounding the Ottawa area over the years. So it's our 10th year running this event, and we've received a great deal of positive feedback from our prior attendees. It's an event that typically provides a bunch of wonderful opportunities for students to connect with professionals in their field of interest, but also connect in other ways and start looking at what they could potentially do with their future in ways that they had never really considered before. So they can thereby gaining insights into their future career paths. And so thank you to all those professionals for helping make this event successful, even this year during the pandemic. So tonight we've got a wide array of people here from various professional pathways in science, some of whom are alumni of Carleton. So there's sure to be somewhat of interest to all of our attendees. Here to MC to us tonight is Abby Carasetti, and Abby's in his 4th year and final year of biochemistry. Geez, doesn't that sound onerous? 4th and final year instead of, hey, he's doing this in 4 years. That's great. But anyway, 4th and final year in biochemistry honors program here at Carleton University. He's also, now get this, he's not only doing a 4th year program in biochemistry and an honors thesis, he's also the vice president of academics for the Carleton Science Student Society. He's the vice president of the finance for the Carleton Chemistry and Biochemistry Society, and he's also a mentor as well as a team lead for the career team at the Science Student Success Center. Dude, you don't do things in small ways. Anyway, he's going to be hosting things tonight, and please join me in welcoming Abby. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Bertram. You actually made my ears red with that. Thank you. Science Networking Forum. I'm just going to explain how this event is going to be structured. So through a round-robin format, we'll ask our professionals some questions over the course of 5 rounds. For each question, the professionals will have 2 to 3 minutes to respond. After this, the event will be open for a Q&A, where if students have any specific questions to ask, they can do so through the chat or the Q&A option, which I think you guys can see at the bottom of your Zoom platforms. Furthermore, this event will be recorded so that we can reach more students. At the end of the event, professionals will provide their contact information in the hopes that students will reach out to learn more. So now I'd like to welcome our first guest, Patricia Harper, a certified genetic counselor at CHEO, the Children's Hospital of Eastern Ontario. So Patricia, can you tell us a bit more about your position and your academic background?
Thanks, Abby, and thanks so much for inviting me to be part of this. So for myself, my background, a little bit of the science background is that I have a Bachelor of Science in biology from the University of Lethbridge. I did a co-op work term as well as independent studies there. So I worked for the Public Health Agency of Canada for about 8 months. So that was a really cool experience. After that, I went to Newfoundland and actually did a Master's of Medicine and did some work on research in genetics in the Newfoundland population because they have a very interesting population structure. So that was quite fun. And then after that, I went to McGill in Montreal to do my genetic counseling degree. So I've kind of gone all across Canada collecting degrees, and now I'm here at CHEO working as a genetic counselor for the past 3 or 4 years. So it's been quite an experience.
Yeah, no, that's super interesting. Thank you so much for introducing yourself. Now to our next speaker, our next panelist, we have Marta Yancharsky. Hopefully I pronounced that correctly. Marta Yancharsky is a sector specialist for AI Big Data as well as Health Biosciences at the Standards Council of Canada. So Marta, would you also be able to tell us a bit more about your position and your academic background?
Sure, thank you. And yes, that was really good on the last name. So I similarly also have an undergraduate in science in biopharmaceuticals. And I could say that I started my work in science very lab heavy through that degree, and also quickly learned that laboratory work isn't particularly suited for my interests, which I think was a really good learning experience, and tried as best to get more clinical research experience throughout my undergraduate, and sort of supplemented the work around my interest in more public policy and foreign affairs, which led me to having a graduate degree in still science, but with a specialization in science communication and public engagement in Scotland from the University of Edinburgh. So this kind of gave me a pathway where I could see that intersection between science, but also the regulatory affairs world and the bridge that's necessary between technical innovation and technical aspects, but also the rest of the world. And so that kind of led me to sort of explore what kind of options are in science that aren't lab-based or research-based, which I felt at the time were the ones that were the most prominent. And I found myself a little niche in regulatory affairs and worked for a pharmaceutical company called GlaxoSmithKline, and sort of earned my keep in trying to figure out the crazy world of looking at what requirements every country has for a pharmaceutical drug. And it was quite the learning curve, but it was also very interesting in being able to master that knowledge, because it turns out it's very necessary for any type of innovation in that space. But at the same time, it's not something that is talked about very often or a popular topic of discussion, which led me really to my current position as a sector specialist in the standards world, because one of the ways that regulatory affairs and regulations can actually, like, how do you actually prove to a legislation that you're compliant is usually through standards. And then you get certified, you have a conformity assessment and all of that sort of aspect. And those standards are usually developed not only by regulators, but actually industry themselves. And it's a collaborative effort. And so I was hired by the Standards Council of Canada, a Crown corporation, to be that advisor for innovators that are in that space, whether it's health biosciences or in the emerging AI, about what are the opportunities of participating in standardization, why standardization is so vital to actually linking to their business development and their IP. And then on the flip side, for regulators, understanding the opportunities to participate in standard development and understanding the nuances of stakeholder needs.
Yeah, I think what's awesome about having such a diverse academic background is because you can pull knowledge from so many more places, as well as you having international experience as well. So you can pull knowledge from all over the world in that sense. So that's cool. Thank you so much for being here. Now to our next panelist, we have Anada Silva, an epidemiologist at the Public Health Agency of Canada. So Anada, would you also be able to give us a bit more about your position and your academic background?
Yeah, sure. Abby, thanks for having me. Anisha, Sue, Lily, this was such a great event and I enjoyed myself last year, so I really appreciate you guys inviting me this year as well. So my name is Anada Silva and I'm an epidemiologist, like you mentioned. Back in undergrad, which seems like a bit time ago now, I did actually same as you, Abby, I did my undergraduate in biochemistry. So during those 4 years, I also didn't really have a clear idea of what you could do with a science degree, a hard sciences degree. So my understanding was that it's either medicine, so like being a doctor, or doing lab work, being in the lab for 6 years maybe. So throughout my undergraduate, I was working in a lab and I did really like it, but I also understood that maybe it wasn't the path for me to do my master's and then eventually do a PhD if you follow that kind of pathway. So I was looking for other avenues, and during that time working in a lab, I did get exposed to biostatistics. So that was a really great opportunity for me to see what kind of other pathways they were. And I did notice that epidemiology was, I literally learned about it in my 4th year of my undergraduate, and I saw that they had a program at U of T. So I went to the University of Toronto for a Master's of Public Health in Epidemiology, and that was a 2-year program. It was a great program. It was course-based. So for some of you that may not enjoy, everyone maybe has some experience writing some thesis or long papers. I liked it, but also I kind of wanted to try something different. So I did a course-based master's, and it's a 2-year program where 2 of those, I get to do 2 placements. And one of those placements was at the World Health Organization, which is a great experience for me, doing epidemiological research. So looking into maternal and child health outcomes of multinational clinical trials. And then afterwards, I was able to actually do a practicum placement with the Public Health Agency of Canada. And that led to my permanent position there. At the Public Health Agency, I was able to work on a couple of teams so far. So starting with the vaccine preventable diseases team, and then moving on to vaccination coverage. And finally, now I'm working with the healthcare associated infections team. So obviously over the course of the year, things have been sidelined due to COVID. So there's been a lot of work planning and shuffling and priority changing during this time with the agency, but it's been a great experience for me learning how nationally we respond to a COVID-19 pandemic. So I'm happy to be here and answer any questions anyone has.
Yeah, thank you so much. Especially with the COVID-19 pandemic, I think the perspective up in epidemiologists is especially prevalent right now. Also, what's really awesome about how diverse our panelists are is that I'm a biochem major, and that means I've definitely thought about either pursuing the pathway that Patricia has pursued or even your pathway. So this really gives me something here. But I imagine there'd be something for any one of our attendees amongst our 4 panelists. So thank you so much. Now, this actually leads into our final panelist. We have Skyler Mallozzi, a consulting geophysicist at Paterson, Grant, and Watson. Can you tell us a bit more about your position and your academic background?
First of all, thank you so much to Ian Bites for inviting me out. I'm really honored to be here as a panelist, especially as a recent graduate of Carleton University. So right now I am a consulting geophysicist with Paterson, Grant, and Watson, which is a geophysical consulting firm based in Toronto, and they are very much rooted in the mining industry. So what they do is they do interpretation of geophysical data. So we look to see, conduct surveys and interpret what's in the subsurface for mining purposes, and quality control of airborne geophysical surveys. So I did my undergrad at Carleton in Bachelor Earth Science in the geophysics concentration, and I every year the Carleton Neuroscience Department goes to this convention in Toronto called PDAC, which is the big mining convention in Canada. And while there, I fell in love with the mining industry and the exploration geophysics industry, where the community was very much suited to me, and it wanted to be something that I wanted to be a part of. So after I finished my degree, I went straight into my master's with Claire Sampson and Richard Ernst in planetary geophysics, looking at lava tubes in Northern California for astrobiological applications. So I was looking at lava tubes as a terrestrial analog for future Mars missions, because if humans were to ever settle on Mars, a place for them to settle in would be these lava tubes, which are caves formed from volcanic systems. So while my project gave me the opportunity to go into planetary sciences, the methods I used allowed me to get into the mining industry. So I started off my career with De Beers, working with their targeting team with a backlog of data that they never got around to properly archiving and processing. And I got to do some rounds of field work with them. And before the pandemic happened, the plan was to transition me over from the targeting team to the field team for the 2020 field season, but due to the pandemic, that did not happen. So I ended up getting this position in August with Paterson, Grant & Watson as a consultant geophysicist. And I've been working on compiling data for a large-scale interpretation project in Africa. And on top of that, I've been volunteering with various social media, or I've been with various geophysics societies with their social media and student outreach.
Yeah, thank you so much. I think what's also awesome about this event is it allows us to clarify any like misconceptions related to any of your fields. And that really was prevalent with what you just said. You were doing work related to like Mars, and it's quite fascinating because there are rocks everywhere. And that means that your job really does span the universe after all. So just food for thought, I guess. Anyway, with that, let us get started into our round portion of our event. So first off, the first question is directed towards Anada. So what personal qualities are required to succeed in your field/job? What qualities did you develop through your journey to your current position?
In terms of successful qualities, I'd say since, like many fields, epidemiologists kind of follow the data and they deal with a large amount of data. So being able to critically think and having a detail-oriented mind, I think is quite important when you are planning, processing, and analyzing this type of data, because the implications of the results or the science communication that results from your analysis has quite large implications within Canada or whatever level or field that you're working in. So I'd say being able to pay attention to details and make sure some of those things aren't wrong it's a great thing. But also, like, larger than that, I think, like any field, being able to be hardworking, attentive, these are just qualities that are keys to success in any field, I'd say. But like the main ones are being detail oriented, I'd say.
No, what's also awesome about that is that none of these traits are really like, you're not really born with them. They're traits that you kind of develop along the way, which actually kind of makes you more optimistic in that sense.
For sure. And I'd say even if people are considering going into epidemiology, like I said, I learned about epidemiology quite late in my undergraduate career. So it's not, if you feel that you're not maybe the strongest at biostatistics, or you think your statistical skills are not the best, I'd say there's lots of room to grow. Everyone learns quite a bit in your master's, and they're very good at guiding you in the development of those skills. And it might sound formidable, or it gets quite detailed, but I think there's lots of room to grow, and being able to have the qualities where you are seeking to learn or improve yourself is quite important in being successful in those. And I think those are kind of the qualities that you do develop within your master's as well.
Yeah, curiosity in scientists. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Anada. To now, our next speaker will be Marta. This question is oriented towards you. How did you become a specialist for both AI, big data, and health and biosciences? How are the two sectors interrelated?
That's a great question. I think there's something about curiosity and opportunity that speaks very strongly in this particular case scenario. I was hired as that sector specialist to bring in industry experience in innovation, and specifically innovation from a regulatory perspective, to the Standards Council of Canada. So I was initially hired just for that particular sector. However, that was back in 2017. And since then, it was clear that there were a big priority of that health sector was around the challenges facing of data analytics and AI in innovation. And the fact that there were, at the time, no regulatory frameworks really for a medical device to be able to include that, and how would they be able to get registered as such. And so there's those types of questions, but realistically, in the world of standards, there were a lot of overarching questions around ethics, around governance, around risk management in the development of AI, not just from a health perspective. And this was something that I found particularly fascinating, because those are the types of questions that are the bread and butter of any type of innovation when it comes to health. And it was, I think, that particular leverage of transferable thought process when and sort of research skills that led me to be able to form the file for the organization in AI and big data. I will admit, I have continuously sort of kept my skills in learning new opportunities. So that has, that really helped in the fact that I had already been developing my skill set in AI up to that point in time, as I found that was something that I was interested in, and I felt that that was something that had the potential of having a future in. And so I've subsequently been able to continue actually in publications on the side in the AI space. And so I was able to develop my expertise alongside working in the health and biosciences sector. I think with the emerging opportunities and challenges in developing AI innovation, and subsequently standards being viewed as one of the main solutions, even prior to any regulatory frameworks, it became that intersection of opportunity and the right skill set to start developing that particular file.
Yeah, especially with AI being such a novel and powerful technique and technology, I imagine that there are potential connections, not just between AI and health and bioscience, but AI and other unrelated sciences that you wouldn't have even imagined, right?
I think the great question, I think the sort of the realization of that came around a roundtable of like the discussion of ethics and AI. And of course, I've heard enough analogies to Terminator to last a lifetime. But I thought it was really fascinating where they were talking about product development of an AI algorithm and how you're supposed to think of ethical values in product development. And they were very sort of overwhelmed with the possible challenge. And I was the only one, I guess, with a background in science research, specifically in clinical research, where that's the first thing you think of is your ethical approvals. You have an ethics review board. You know, like this is something ingrained into any type of product development when you're dealing in a clinical setting. So it was that kind of perspective where, yeah, in fact, there are those transferable sort of connections between science at large and when it comes to AI.
Yeah, well, thank you so much, Marta. To our next panelist, this question is now oriented towards Patricia. How did you get to the position you're in today?
Yeah, so I think I spoke about that a little bit with my background. So I'll elaborate a little bit on that, but also I realized I kind of missed the second part of your question, which is what I do now during my first part. But how I got there was really through my undergrad and then my master's degree. So those are, you know, to go into genetic counseling, it's a master's program, and you only need an undergrad to get into it. But it's particularly for people who are very curious about healthcare and about science and genetics. Genetics is such a hot topic and interesting field right now. There's lots of different technologies that have come up recently. So I was really passionate about getting into kind of a new field that was really exploding right now. And genetics happened to be really cool because you get to see all these different, you kind of work in these clinical teams and you get to see all these different impacts that genetics has on your body, right from very early on till, you know, till old age. And so it was really, that's kind of what drove me to get those degrees and to continue on doing what I'm doing now. And really the genetics counseling is, it's a very clinical, the program is very clinical. So you're doing clinical rotations, you're seeing patients in prenatal, cancer, general genetics, all sorts of things. And you really get a sense of, you know, teamwork and really talking with other professionals and helping with patient care. And that's something that I really enjoy, is making sure that patients get a high quality of healthcare and making sure they're satisfied with their care at the end of the day. So, you know, I think all those skills have led me to where I am. And I think genetic counseling is a very interesting and cool field right now. And it's certainly something that that is quite, it's developing quite quickly, so.
Yeah, I'm also very interested in genetics, being a biochem major. It's always quite interesting how, because you were talking about how you were like working with like clinical rotation, so therefore you'd end up working with other different subfields of doctors, right, of all different types. Now, all of these conditions and diseases of various parts of the body can be simply reduced all the way down to simply your blueprint, your DNA. So. Yeah.
Yes, that's right. A lot of, you know, there's some things that are not really too genetic, but you'd be surprised how many things have a genetic component to them and how much of an effect it can have on your, you know, the way that even your metabolism, your hormones, everything functions in your body. Really kind of, your genetics plays a huge role in that. So it's really cool to learn about that.
Learn more about it. Absolutely. Thank you so much, Patricia. Now to our next speaker. This question is oriented towards Skyler. On a typical day, what do you do?
So because this position is relatively new for me, because I started this position in August. So it's actually to the day 3 months since I've been with this company, and we are working on a large-scale interpretation project in Africa. So we had hundreds of gigabytes of data sent to our offices. So my responsibility has been so far going through these tens of surveys and poring over the data and cross-referencing it to what the company already has, to see whether or not it's data that we've already had, or if we are able to use it and incorporate it into a national grid, like a national magnetic field grid for the country. So a typical day is poring over this data and making sure we are able to extract the data and stitch it into a national magnetic field grid. And we just wrapped up that component a week and a half, 2 weeks ago. So now we're moving on to the interpretation phase. So now we are looking at these grids, these national maps that we made, and now are moving into interpreting. So trying to pick out structures, lithologies, like what rock units are in there. So a lot of our work currently is in GIS or ArcGIS. So it's basically, so at this point, we are looking at the national grids and trying to interpret what is in the subsurface.
Do you think you prefer simply the combing over all the data part of it, or the interpretation analysis part of your job?
Ooh, I'm definitely more in the processing side than interpretation for me, because I really like playing around systems and seeing different data sets and uh, and what what different things I can do to the data to not just make it look better, but to make it cleaner, try out what's procedures work and what procedures don't work. And especially early in my career, that's such an important aspect for me, because um yeah, it's an important aspect for me, because that gets me to learn different processes. So in the future, I can go through different procedures much quicker and get to the finished product more quickly and have that much stronger knowledge base than I would now. And especially in a field like geophysics, well, with all sciences, everything is evolving so quickly that you're always learning. So if you get the foundations early on, it makes learning new procedures a lot quicker and a lot easier.
Yeah, it's really setting you up for down the road, I think. Yeah.
Exactly.
Cool. Thank you so much, Skyler. Now we are moving on to our second round of questions. Now we're actually changing the order of our panelists each round, just to keep you guys on your toes. So our speaker right now is Marta. This question's oriented towards you. What companies / institutions do you offer advice and support to?
Thanks for the question. It definitely, rotation change kept me on my toes. So yes, it kind of varies on sort of who makes the inquiry. So my job is twofold. One is around stakeholder engagement. So it's really around being able to craft a network of what I find to be important stakeholders to make sure that they have the right information towards them, and be able to ingrain myself in the network associations in Canada. The other side is responding to inquiries. So we do have quite a lot of inquiries that come through that people are interested, or people are finding challenges in their area. And so, like myself as a sector specialist in this particular sector, we do have other sector specialists in other sectors, and we together answer those types of inquiries. From our stakeholders, we're really a mix of sort of the 3 to 4 main groups, and we identify them as industry, government, academia, and consumer interests. So those are your 4 main groups of individuals and stakeholders that are represented in a standards development process. And most of the time, my strategic advice and work happens with industry and government. So it's a matter of having discussions with federal departments that are either responsible for regulation in a certain area of AI, or having discussions, or are responsible for promoting the AI industry in Canada. We have a very strong AI industry. We have a really strong sort of SME, so small medium enterprise environment in both Montreal and Toronto, and even here in Ottawa, with some really strong companies. And so working with them to help figure out the best way to promote, make sure that we have the international leadership. It's also a very competitive field internationally, with other stakeholders at play. And so making sure that we provide, along with other federal departments, that support to help to cultivate and ensure that leadership is there. From an industry side, it's really working with Canadian companies. So whether they're sort of startup companies, or whether they already have a very large footprint, they just to be able to work with them and work with their team. Some of them already have individuals working in standards, and it's a matter of helping to get their efficiencies and optimizing sort of what is their desired outcomes from a business and corporate growth, and being able to see where they can leverage the standards work that they do. Or it's a matter of introducing them to the world of standards. And, you know, it's really exciting to see an expert that's been working really hard at this particularly new way of looking at something, and bringing them to the table of other international experts. And some of them are their competitors, and being able to have a conversation that's only technical subject based, and be able to see that sort of Canadian expertise shine at international technical committees. So it's really sort of fascinating to see that. Myself, I'm also qualified as a delegate for Canada and a technical expert to the AI Committee for Standards at ISO. which is where most of our work is being done. And so it's been really great to be able to also bring that expertise back to the table.
Yeah, it sounds like communication skills and networking skills are pretty paramount in your job, is what I've understood as well.
Absolutely. It's sort of a crazy world where it's extremely technical, but it's also extremely, communications, engagement, a little bit of foreign affairs when dealing with other countries' delegations. We always sit alphabetically, so we have some big neighbors. But other than that, for sure, it's an interesting skill set to have, and that's why standards work sometimes is a little bit obscure, because it's hard to find that diversity.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, well, thank you, Marta. I'm so sorry. Our next speaker on this question is oriented towards Patricia. So on a typical day in this position, what do you do? And how has COVID-19 altered this?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I'll speak kind of specifically about my role right now. I'm working primarily with the genetics laboratory at CHEO right now. So in a typical day, I kind of change roles pretty often, but some of the things that I could be doing are acting as a liaison between our laboratory and a clinician or a physician. So if they have questions about, a doctor has questions about genetic testing and they want to get some more information about the type of testing that we offer and what that looks like, then they can call me up and we can have a discussion about what that entails. And so it's serving as that liaison and that support for our clients, or who are usually other genetics professionals, as well as all sorts of doctors and nurses. And so we really support that, as well as I do a lot of interpretation of genetic data. So I look at somebody's genetic code, for example, and if there is a change identified, then I look at that change and say whether or not it's disease causing. And then I write a report back to the physician that explains that finding. So it's kind of interesting to be kind of a little bit more on the analysis and interpretation side, where we're looking at the data and then writing the report, but then also able to answer questions about that report from the physician and from the patient themselves sometimes. So it's really, really cool. COVID has changed our role. I would say for me, not a lot, because most of my analysis and interpretation is done kind of in an office, as well as my liaison role. I'm usually on the phone or on email or fax or something like that. I know that for example, my clinical colleagues and some of my other colleagues are doing most things by Zoom right now. So there's a lot of patient appointments and scheduling and stuff that happens over telephone and Zoom, and we're doing very few in-person appointments unless they're required for a physical exam or something like that. So it's changed everything more to an electronic base, I would say. So it's had an impact, but we've been able to keep up with our work so far. So yeah, absolutely.
The information is still getting out. The necessary information that you need to spread is still getting out. It's just not necessarily in person anymore.
Exactly. Yeah. The same as kind of most fields right now. I think we're all kind of doing most things by Zoom if we can. So,
right. Yeah. Just adapting to the situation, I think.
Exactly. For sure.
Yeah. Thank you, Patricia. Now our next question is oriented towards Skyler. How does your master's degree relate to the work that you are doing now in industry?
Well, as I mentioned in my intro, my master's was looking at these caves formed from volcanic systems called lava tubes for Mars analog purposes. So these caves would act as a terrestrial analog for any future Mars missions. And this was rooted in, I was part of a larger astrobiology group headed by Richard Levier at McGill University. So even though my project was in planetary sciences, I used two methods, which are potential field geophysics, so looking at Earth's magnetic field and the small changes due to the due to the shallow geology, and then electromagnetics, which looks at the conductivity of the rock. So these two methods are very widely used in the mining industry. So even though my project was in planetary sciences, I was allowed to take the methods that I used for this project and use it to transition into the mining industry, because the foundations are the same, just the applications are different. So having a master's degree definitely gave me an edge over other students, because it also gave me additional field experience, and it gave me extra time to make contacts in my industry, because for me, networking is such a large asset, because I got to not only meet people to give me good career advice, but I also got to know people better. And some of these people ended up being future employers and people that I respect greatly. And that just having that extra few years to hone my skills and develop my network and grow my network has given me an edge over other students. So while yes, you can go with an undergraduate degree and become a geophysicist, I recommend giving the advice that I was given, and to take the time, do your master's, and take the time to not only hone your skills, but to develop your network and grow your network. Because the phrase, it's not what you know, it's who you know, that definitely applies in today's world as much as it did in previous generations.
Right. It's pretty crazy how much one can do in a single year. And that's absolutely applicable towards a master's degree. Imagine you are given 2 years further to develop before you enter the industry. Right. So no, that's great advice. Thank you so much. Now, our final question rather for round 2 is for Anada. How did you get to the position that you're in today? Now, this will likely result in you rehashing some stuff from your intro. I totally understand that. But if you have any novel takes on it, feel free to talk about it now.
Okay. Yeah, so like I did say in my intro, I found myself in undergrad unsure of exactly what I wanted to do. I knew if I was actually working in an atherogenomics lab with the University of Ottawa Heart Institute, and I was considering doing a cellular molecular medicine master's. And I was considering, if I did that master's degree, I would likely need to do a PhD in order to work in a lab setting with some sort of capacity, whether I'm developing research questions or running a lab. So I knew that would be a commitment of at least maybe 7 to 8 years within a lab, So I was really considering whether that was my pathway. And I knew I really wanted to be in the health industry or healthcare field in some capacity. And through actually that lab experience with exposure to GWAS, which was genome-wide association studies, as well as other statistical techniques, I was quite interested and then eventually exposed to the field of epidemiology. And that's kind of how I learned about these programs that were being offered. It was, at the time when I did it, it was actually, epidemiology in general and public health is a massively growing field right now. But even at the time when I was going to it, programs had not been established for quite a while in Canada. All the major highly regarded programs were in the States. So deciding to pick this 2-year master's program at University of Toronto was kind of like a leap for me, and seeing if I would really like it. And I ended up doing it. I really liked being able to utilize statistical techniques and apply them and do something, have some sort of public health action resulting from it in the public field. So that's kind of how I got into epidemiology. And then I also realized I didn't give much of a description of what I do in my current position, much like Patricia. So I want to talk about that a bit more too. So when I eventually did some practicums and got into the Public Health Agency of Canada, my current position right now is working on the healthcare associated infections team. So what that consists of is we are running a national surveillance network across all of Canada of 80 plus hospitals, where each of these hospitals submit data to us based on any infections, so nosocomial infections that you get in the hospital. And this data of patient data as well as laboratory data is sent to us for analysis. So it's quite a concern, antimicrobial resistance in general in the world. So typically nosocomial infections, things that you catch in the hospital, are much more severe due to the patient population. So people are already sick going into the hospital, as well as the types of diseases that circulate within hospitals are typically more resistant to your first and second line antibiotics. So learning the causes and ways to reduce this type of disease will save a lot of money within the Canadians' health economy, as well as reduce mortality and morbidity within Canada. So having this data was highly useful, especially the fact that it was a mix of epidemiology and laboratory linked data. So being able to see the genetic variations within the organisms that are causing disease and the effect it has on the patient is quite a valuable type of data to have. So what we do on a national level is gather this data and provide it back to our hospitals so they're able to know what the status of their hospital is in relation to Canada and their region, as well as find ways to reduce this morbidity and mortality caused by healthcare associated infections in their hospital.
There was something that you mentioned at the beginning too, and this is something that I've also noticed from this event every time I chat with the professionals. There's a lot of benefit of hearing about an opportunity and simply jumping on it and watching where it guides you, right? Yes, there was someone I met who did similar research to what I had seen in McGill relating to biology, and they ended up as the safety commissioner for like Nuclear Canada, right? Mm-hmm. So I think that really...
I totally agree. And I think, honestly, in undergrad, it's okay, honestly, not to know exactly what you want to do. You still have so many years to research, decide, to network with people. I think what is important, though, is to be able to decide that you may like something. And if you may like it, I think it's really important to try it in some substantial fashion, because you won't really know until you actually dig yourself into it in some sort of way, whether it's doing research, whether it's meeting someone that has that sort of background, or such as this event, or actually going out and trying it. And that's kind of what I did before. Unluckily, Ottawa, or I didn't know about it, or they didn't have this event at the University of Ottawa. So I'm glad that Carleton has it right now, but I didn't know what types of roles there were in the professional field. So when I was interested in epidemiology or learning about it, I managed to go meet someone at Ottawa Public Health, and they told me about their job as an epidemiologist. And that gave me great insights into what the field was and kind of what you would do in a professional capacity as well.
Right. Just thank you so much for the plug for this event. Absolutely love it. Thank you so much for that. Now, moving on to our next round. Once again, we have changed the order of our speakers, once again, to keep you all on your toes. Our first speaker in this round will be Skyler. How do you see jobs in your field right now and in the future? Where do you think your field is going?
So the exploration industry is in a tight position right now because a lot of our job is relied on field work and getting out into the fields to conduct surveys in order to get to my position, which is processing and interpreting the data. But you first have to go out, either fly a survey or get on the ground to do field work. And with the current restrictions in place, it is hard to get out and do field work. So our industry is in a bit of a low right now because of these travel restrictions, where even I was unemployed for a few months earlier this year because of the pandemic. But that said, as restrictions lift and as borders open eventually, when it is safe to do so, we will be able to travel and we will be able to get out into the field. I do expect a bit of a rebound, but at this time, because of travel restrictions, we cannot go it's harder for us to get out into the field and to do field work. So unfortunately, the exploration geophysics industry is in a tight position right now, but I do see it being more optimistic as the pandemic clears up, as is the case with a lot of other industries.
You mentioned a little bit about planetary geophysics earlier. Do you think that could be where your field is going, more oriented towards that kind of stuff with like potentially habitable planets in our solar system?
Well, maybe in a few hundred years when we're able to travel to other planets, sure. But right now there are still extensive resources throughout the world that can that either haven't been discovered or haven't been developed yet due to lack of funding or not enough exploration. So there is still a lot of resources, and especially with advancements in health, safety and environment in the mining industry over the past 15 years, it's now much the environmental impact is less than what it was, and mining does tend to have doesn't have the greatest reputation among the general public due to its history with environmental procedures. So maybe when we are able, let's focus on getting humans to other planets first before we focus on mining other planets.
Yeah, I think that's totally fair, actually. Thank you so much, Skyler. This next question is oriented towards Anada. What opportunities in Canada are there for epidemiologists that are in the private sector? Are there opportunities in the private sector for your position?
So I'd like to say that there are opportunities. Some of my colleagues may know better than I, but I'd say when I went into my master's of public health, there is a focus on public health. So it's quite a bit in the public sphere or public domain, but there are many private opportunities. And some of those things that I was noticing of some of my classmates and colleagues, past colleagues that had gone into private are working, either going to other countries, working in private hospitals, working for the pharmaceutical industry as a pharmacoepidemiologist. So using their clinical trial data to kind of look at the efficacy and effectiveness of those trials, and also consulting. So I'd say epidemiology follows wherever the data is, and since usually health data is quite tied to public data due to privacy reasons, a lot of that analysis and a lot of that work is being done in the public sphere. So working for public health organizations, working for non-for-profits, working at different levels of government, whether it be municipal, provincial, and national. But I'd say there are other types of health data and other types of data that are accessible in the private industry, like consulting and pharmaceuticals. Those are also opportunities. And some of those things you kind of get into them, whether you are working with them previously or there are practicum opportunities. So those are essentially co-op placements during your master's, where you have the opportunity to apply to work at some of these private industries as well. I'd say in the consulting sphere, if that's an avenue people are quite interested on going down, I'd say that it's not the most common pathway, that where you do a master's in epidemiology and go into healthcare consulting. I more often see people going from the business sphere, going from doing business school with backgrounds in healthcare or healthcare associated fields and going into that industry, but there's definitely people that do that as well.
Yeah, that's especially prevalent right now too with, I think, Pfizer, who recently announced that they're doing clinical trials on a vaccine, I think for COVID. And I'd imagine to be even able to get to that point, you would require some levels of epidemiologists there, right?
For sure. Yeah. And I'd say that in the private industry, they look upon people that have PhD level qualifications. And I think that's the type of level you would need to be at, or it's favored upon. Definitely in an industry where they are hiring talent in order to like create the best results. So they want to be able to see that this person, especially when they're interviewing, when they don't necessarily have a complete or in-depth understanding of epidemiology or the healthcare field, they want to be able to see that you have put those years in at a PhD level. So people are typically, just for also for name recognition as well, at a PhD level when they're working in a consulting type of atmosphere.
Right, very high level. Thank you, Anada. The next question that we have is oriented towards Marta. This is a similar question that we asked to Skyler, actually. How do you see jobs in your field right now and in the future, especially with AI?
Sure. So I think I'll maybe pivot and look at just the AI industry in general, because I'm really cognizant that my particular position is very niche, and being a strategic advisor, I think, is more common, but looking at it from that technical perspective, there aren't quite many positions, similar to actually how Anada described it in his particular field. However, in Canada, I think we're particularly fortunate to have such a very strong research and academic base in AI. And this is something that's been recognized internationally. There's been quite a lot of awards and grants materialized in universities across Canada for the development of AI R&D. And I think what's really fascinating about this particular sector is the very close relationship that universities now have with AI and startups. And we're noticing quite a lot of the hubs that we have identified around Canada where AI startups are found are usually very close to the research labs and the academic institutions that have very strong AI programs, very strong AI research. And so I think this is a field where, for at least the Canadian market, is quite promising. And I think it's interesting because, of course, the first sort of idea of a AI professional or a career in AI is one really revolved around sort of programming and being able to develop the technical computer science skills around AI. But it's quite interesting working with these startups, is that's very much an undisputable part of that startup, of that technology, but it really is only sort of one aspect of, and being able to think about the implementation, being able to think about what kind of market, what kind of consumer does this AI system go? Because realistically, it's not something that's going to show up on the shelves in a store. It's really going to be working with another company, another industry, and working on how to implement that kind of technology. Because fundamentally, the AI is only as good as the data. And it's really around what kind of data you're using. Is it from agriculture? Is it from healthcare? Even is it, from something, from a medical device or from geophysics? So it's, I think, really a skill set that requires a flexibility and awareness of the market, of what kind of industry partnerships AI would be looking at. And I think, especially now with the growing concerns and growing priorities around making sure that risk management in the deployment and implementation of AI systems is paramount, and ensuring a certain level of governance, those types of roles for compliance, conformity assessment, safety, I think we will see those types of positions growing for sure.
I think what you're talking about is also really awesome with like novel and new technologies. I was told this in grade 7. In 20 years, you will probably have a job that you didn't even know existed, right? And that's the perk of having novel technology, because not just is the obvious, like a developer of AI is present, there are so many facets of that new technology that we haven't simply thought of yet that require a job for it. So.
And I think Anada said it best that, even in undergrad, even 5 or 10 years ago, you may not have imagined that the position exists, because that's kind of where the pace we're at. And so not to be able to give ourselves that opportunity to leave that space open, and not necessarily having to see that you have to pick something from the list as it stands now, because that list evolves just as your interests evolve.
Yeah, exactly. Thank you so much, Marta. Now to our final panelist for this round. Actually, we're going to cut our round portion short after this question, and we're going to go directly to the Q&As, if that's all right with you guys. Cool. So Patricia, this question is oriented towards you. What personal qualities are required to succeed in your field or job, and how many have you developed on your journey towards your position now?
That's a great question. What personal qualities? I mean, I think I have developed so many along this road, and it really just depends on kind of what you're working on and what you're doing. You know, I started out, probably one of the base sort of things that I started out with was just curiosity in science, which everyone here has. So that's already the first qualification checked off. So I really started out with that and kind of built upon that. You know, my role does require a degree of organization and detail orientation and a lot of what people sort of traditionally call them as soft skills. So communication and things like that we learn in our program, as well as just speaking to colleagues, being involved in teams. So a lot of those things I would say I definitely have picked up and continue to improve on all the time. You know, you continue to learn. I'm still learning. I will continue to learn for the rest of my life. And so having that that basics of curiosity and wanting to learn about different things, as well as that combination of kind of maybe some of the other soft skills and things, has really helped with my position in particular. Yeah.
Not to put you on the spot, but are there any like unusual traits that you may have learned in this? Like, for example, when I started research, because of me doing cancer-related research, I've developed patience, of all things, because of how many times experiments can go wrong, and therefore you're required to troubleshoot them until they work. So I'm curious whether there's any traits like that that you may have developed.
Yes, that's very interesting. I do have a bit of a background in research as well, and I can remember thinking that, you know, you go through 100 experiments and you're waiting for that one that works. So you definitely learn some patience that way. One of the ones that I think some of the things that I think that I've been sort of surprised to learn is the amount of just listening skills that you develop as a clinician. So listening to your patients, your clients, your other doctors and colleagues, and that's true for a lot of areas. Just being able to listen to what somebody has to say and really absorb that and kind of give an educated response that you can that speaks directly to what their kind of inner thought process and question has been. I think that's a good example.
Yeah, an extremely valuable trait, being a good listener, I think.
Yeah, exactly.
With that, we are concluding our round portion of this event. Now we're going to be doing direct Q&As that we've received from our attendees. If you guys are ready for that. Yeah. So this first question is oriented towards Skyler. So Skyler, how might geophysics relate to astrobiology? And how did your work in understanding lava tubes relate? In brackets, they've also included, I'm a biochem major interested in astrobiology. So this is where this question is coming from.
Absolutely. So my work was part of a larger astrobiology group. So my project didn't deal directly with the astrobiology parts, but my research group had a geologist, a microbiologist, and then a geophysicist. So we had three different aspects with the overarching objective, where my portion of the project was to detect these lava tubes from the surface, because these are caves. They're underground, and they're basically underground circular shapes, or cylindrical shapes. So my objective was to find the lava tubes, but then there was a geologist and a microbiologist that were collecting samples and looking at inside these lava tubes to get a better idea of what is inside and looking at these microorganisms that flourish in these lava tubes and looking for biosignatures. And they're typically found in the ceiling in these little droplets, almost like they kind of look like icicles coming down from the roof of the lava tube. So the microbiologist was looking at the actual organisms and the biosignatures that these microorganisms were leaving behind. And that's the second part of our project was there's the belief that you could find these biosignatures of microorganisms on these lava tubes in Mars because they are isolated systems. So that could prove that there was life on Mars previously. So whoever the anonymous questioner is, reach out to me afterwards if we're giving our contact info, and I could forward you up the professor at McGill who has a large interest in astrobiology, and you can follow up with them and talk to them more about astrobiology, because it really is an interesting subject and it's exploded in the planetary science industry over the past 5 years or so. There's been a whole bunch of research groups being developed throughout America, funded by NASA, and then also in Canada by the Canadian Space Agency. So if you end up not emailing me, look up Richard Levier at McGill, because that's the astrobiologist that I dealt with at when I was doing my master's at Carleton.
Yeah, I think I'm going to check that out too. That sounds really cool. Thank you so much. This next question from our attendees is to Anada. How different is the stats from your master's degree in comparison to doing a statistics degree?
Okay. I don't know exactly. I don't know. So since I didn't do a degree in statistics, I'm going to say that from the classmates that I knew that were in biostatistics or doing a pure statistics degree, I'd say that epidemiology is the difference in that you don't go into as much of the pure statistics or the theory and the research of the development of statistical modeling techniques or different intricacies into different types of statistics. But I'd say that you are learning statistics for the purpose of some sort of action. So you're learning, for example, you're learning how to model Kaplan-Meier survival curves in order to analyze the survivability rate or the amount of people that survive within a particular study. So we learn healthcare associated applicable statistical techniques and modeling techniques in order to analyze, process health data, and hopefully generate some interpretations and some action from that data. I'd say that if you are coming from a statistical or maths background and you are very much interested in the modeling and not necessarily the application or the healthcare associated application of the statistics, go into a master's of statistics and you love doing calculus, integrals, and everything like that. But I'd say if you are interested in the Canadian health system and international health systems, how data collected in various forms affects those systems and how it plays in, because it's also implementation, how you communicate those results to the public and how you actually eventually reduce morbidity and mortality within a population, then go into epidemiology.
Yeah, also regarding like statistics, I think statistics is found in most programs to subcapacity anyway, right?
For sure,
So,
for
as
sure.
you were saying, yeah. Cool, thank you so much, Anada. Hopefully that answered your question. Next, this question is oriented towards Marta. Dr. Janczarski, I'm so sorry if I mispronounced that. Do you find that the innovation in technology is able to benefit individuals in the medical field? Can it be possible to have AI able to accomplish tasks in hospitals, i.e. nursing duties?
Actually, that's a fascinating question, and no reason the last name, though I have to say the doctor would be maybe an eventual honorary degree, but I'm not out there for a PhD. No, but I think absolutely. And I think that's where my exposure to AI really took shape, because coming through genomics and basically it's data analytics of just huge amounts of data on only 4 letters, really. But I think it's really a good place for innovation for this particular type of technology, because there are so many decisions to be made. There are so many interpretations to factor in when looking at sort of your best path forward. What are your options? And though I by no means mean that this is something that technology would be replacing jobs, and I know that's something that has been mentioned in the media, of the worry of where AI will take over, and not only in a Terminator fashion, but also in sort of professional opportunities down the road. But being really involved in some of these AI systems developments and in those types of conversations, it's pretty clear that, especially when it comes to a health space, that's not the concern. The concern is how to make this the best tool for the right efficiencies with the right assurance for that deliverable. So I think there's so much opportunity for efficiency and optimization, and at its core, that's what AI systems are supposed to provide, is that optimization of whether it's data analysis, whether it's being able to provide predictions and solutions that for us to consider that we didn't have the capacity to do that kind of thinking in that time. And so I think the world is our oyster in that regards, to be able to have those types of tools and apply it to challenges that we've been struggling with in healthcare for decades.
Yeah, I think a lot of people overestimate the power of it and don't really appreciate how effective of a tool it can be used as instead. Yeah. So thank you so much, Marta. This next question is oriented towards Patricia. This question is, when it comes to genetic variation, do you kind of study the differences and similarities between normal DNA and DNA that could have been deformed due to diseases?
That's a good question. So whenever we're looking at a genetic variation or change, we're always comparing it to what we think the sort of standard is. So that depending on what you're looking at, so for example, if we're looking at very small one single base pair changes, we have a population of apparently healthy older individuals that we kind of compare that sequence to. And so we can pick up if there's a change. Now that change could be associated with disease, or maybe it's not. So we do use kind of a reference population to compare it to, but as well as digging deeper into it to look at what do the evidence show towards whether or not that could cause disease. So for example, if we see it and it's very common in a control population, then we would say that's probably not causing disease, or at least not very severe disease. Whereas if it's very rare, that might be more of an indication that it could be disease associated. But we all have genetic variations, and that's what makes us all different and unique. And so it's really just making sure that you're interpreting that change in kind of the most appropriate way, that it's not just a rare change that causes somebody to have some unique trait or something that's not at all associated with disease. So we're really looking at, my laboratory is a clinical laboratory, so we're really looking at disease causing changes and not necessarily ancestry DNA type things. Yeah.
Or simply like SNPs, like single nucleotide polymorphisms or anything. Right.
Yeah, we actually do the whole spectrum. So we look at whole chromosome changes. So for example, Down syndrome, we look for smaller, deletions or duplications of portions of the chromosome, as well as just single nucleotide changes. So, yeah.
Okay, thank you so much, Patricia. This next question is oriented towards Skyler. Dr. Mallozzi, you explained earlier about how you're in a mining exploration for a bit. Can you describe your experience in that?
First of all, I'm very flattered, but I am not a doctor. I need another 4 years of school to do that, which I don't think I'm actually going to get around to because I kind of enjoy my work right now. But so mining, I think I interchanged the terms geophysical exploration and mining exploration because just for me personally, because for geophysical exploration, there's mining, there's oil and gas, and then there's also environmental surveying. But for mining exploration, my experience was, first of all, this position with PGW. And then also I worked with De Beers, like the De Beers group, so the diamond company, for 11 months. And a lot of the work that I did with the field team was we did something called ground checking, where after we fly an airborne survey, regardless of the method, we pick out anomalies in the data where diamonds are hosted in a rock structure called kimberlites, and they're circular structures. So we look for that in data, and we go around trying to see if we could explain the anomaly, because kimberlites are under the ground. They're almost never right at the surface. So we try to explain these anomalies, and then after, if we are able to explain what's causing these circular anomalies, then they will go get drills, and make drill holes in the area and see if they could drill into kimberlite. And if they find kimberlite, then they see what the grade is, if there's enough in quantity, and if there's enough per ton or enough diamonds per ton that can mine. So that is my experience is directly in the mining industry. And then I also volunteer as the social media director for the Canadian Exploration Geophysical Society, and also for their foundation as the student outreach coordinator. So I reach out to students and try to get scholarship recipients more involved in the exploration industry and mining industry. So that's my quick plug for the foundation, because it is something that I am passionate about. But for mining exploration, the jobs that I've had so far in my career have been rooted in mining exploration, whether it's De Beers or PGW, but PGW is much more flexible in who they consult with, whether it's mining companies, government entities, or other companies.
Okay, thank you so much, Skyler. We wanted to end our Q&A portion of this event by 7:25, and therefore there are a couple questions that are oriented towards all four of you. I'm going to ask one of those, and then we can close off the event with that. Does that sound good? Awesome. So this question, thank you so much for all your advice. It is really helpful. I have a question for anyone that is willing to answer it. So therefore, I'm going to orient this towards all four of you. As a student about to graduate, I'm looking for advice on how to best network, as I'm unsure on how to do it. Is it harder to do so with the COVID-19 pandemic? Is there any tips / advice that you would give us about this? Any strategies that you found to be helpful to network with professionals virtually? Interesting take on that. Who would like to start this off? Patricia, would you like to start this off?
So just so that I understand the question, you're wondering about networking in the time of COVID, basically.
That's how I understood it too, yeah.
Yeah, it can be a little bit more challenging. I was at a conference a couple of weeks ago that was done all by Zoom, but I would say that in some ways it's actually easier because people are so much more willing to chat by Zoom. You can chat with somebody in another part of the world or, you know, another province much more easily maybe than you could have before. So it's actually in some ways an opportunity, although it is a challenge to maybe not meet in person. I would say take advantage of the Zoom chats that people are embracing right now. Sorry, you're on mute.
Oh, my bad. Anada turned his mic off. Anada, would you like anything to contribute to this?
Sure, I could add a bit. Yeah, it's definitely with the pandemic. For myself, meeting people in person is kind of the best way for me to be in a networking situation. So I do understand the challenges of having a virtual event, but also I'd like to say that typically when you're looking to network, sometimes your network is not necessarily the biggest network you know. So I'd say that a good thing to do is get involved in some sort of mentorship, or work in a lab, or apply, or even just email a professor and ask to talk to them about any part of their research that they're doing. And I know professors would love to talk about their research. So if you go in, I remember in undergrad, I wanted to work in a lab to get some of that experience. I think I emailed about 50 different professors, and maybe 2 replied, even just to meet up. So I'm saying, like, just send out those emails. It will definitely be worth it. You only need one person. And when you go in and form a relationship with one of those people, their network is going to be much, much larger than yours. So leveraging other people's networks is definitely a good way to go about it, especially if it's in a field that you really care about or you're interested in. So that's one tip, I guess, I'd like to say.
Yeah, thank you. Marta, would you have anything to add to this?
I think I would add, just with Anada, it's not also like emailing, I think, with your academic network, you know, your professors, even if it's not necessarily working in a lab, they may also have professional or industry experience. In my particular field, LinkedIn is a very strong medium, and don't be afraid to connect with someone that you may have not met or interacted with, and shooting them a message of, you know, your profile, your background looks really interesting. Would you be free to, you know, answer a few questions around what you work in, or some of the projects that you're in? Over the last few months, I have definitely noticed an increase in activity there, and having those types of cold call messages in my inbox. And some of them are sort of in that graduate, early career phase, individuals who are just looking to expand their network, and being able to share posts about what you're interested in reading, or any like work that you've done, and being able to build that brand so that those individuals can then also look at your profile and get a good snapshot of you, and be able to maybe provide that advice based on what your experience have been thus far. I definitely seen proposals and job offers come through those types of networking through LinkedIn. So I would very highly advise to make sure that even if you are just still a student, to start building that profile and start building that network.
Skyler, would you have anything to add to this? I am so sorry for infringing upon your time. I understand you have to leave at 7:20. If you have anything to add to this, please do.
They actually covered the bases really well. Just don't be afraid to email any, like whether it's a company, a professor, a person. It doesn't matter who you email. If they don't respond to you, they don't respond. But the best way to get to know companies or people is just to get them to talk about themselves. And it's amazing what ends up opening, because you just go and take an interest and ask questions. And a lot of students make the mistake of, when they go, like whether it's like virtual job fairs or events, talks, webinars, the students tend to just think about like getting a job, or like it's basically just getting a job. Just try to learn as much as possible, and the opportunities will come if you take an interest, and you show potential people in your network that you're willing to learn, and you're willing to do what it takes to become a better person, not just for the advancement of yourself, but just taking an interest in the company to show that you can improve the company itself. So that's all I would add to that, but everyone else covered the bases pretty well. But as you said, I do have a train to catch, because it leaves in 10 minutes, and I'm probably gonna have to sprint now, but it was worth it. Thank you so much, and good luck. If anybody wants to email me, follow up with questions, my email's open. They'll get SSSC will forward my contact info. I'll be glad to answer any questions outside of this.
Yeah, I don't know if you, thank you so much, Skyler. Don't miss your train because of this. In the chat itself, I think everyone can see this. It says to email the SSC at carleton.ca in case any of your questions haven't been answered. There were a lot of questions from our attendees, so people were very involved. So yeah, thank you so much. Simply email the SSC and they can put you in contact with our professionals on this panel. And with that, we can wrap up our Q&A. So first off, thank you guys so much. Thank you. Let's thank our professionals for making the time to speak at this event. Your responses were insightful. You answered so many questions. I know a lot of my questions have been answered too. We'd also like to thank the SSC for all the effort they put into making this event possible. If you enjoyed this event, we have some upcoming events, including multiple fun social events next week for Science Kindness Week, our lab tour week in January, where you can virtually tour some research labs on campus, as well as our how to apply for a DSRI workshop, and honors poster presentation session in the spring for fourth-year students. To find out about these events and more, follow the SSSC on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. So thank you all for coming, and we hope you enjoyed your night. Feel free to reach out to any of the professionals, as I've said, through the SSSC email.